In 2025, New York City, the global capital of, well, capitalism, did something nobody saw coming. It elected a Democratic Socialist as its mayor. So today, we're going to break down exactly how this political earthquake really happened. Right, so the question on everyone's mind was this. How on earth did a young state assemblyman, Zohran Mamdani, manage to take down a political giant to lead America's biggest city? Well, the story doesn't actually start with the winner. It starts with a mayor in deep, deep trouble. You see, every big political shakeup has a fault line, and this one started right at the very top. The incumbent mayor was facing a crisis that cracked the city's entire political landscape wide open. It all kicked off with a massive political firestorm. Back in September 2024, Mayor Eric Adams gets hit with a federal indictment. Almost overnight, his approval rating just tanks, plummeting to only 26%. Now here's the twist. Months later, the charges were suddenly dropped. But you know what? For a lot of voters, the trust was already gone. The damage was done.
All that turmoil created this huge power vacuum, and it basically threw the door wide open for two very different people to jump into the spotlight. You had a former governor looking for a big comeback, and a young progressive who was ready to start a revolution.
So this power vacuum set the stage for the Democratic primary. And it turned into this classic David versus Goliath fight, really for the soul of the party. Okay, so on one side, you've got Andrew Cuomo, the former governor, a political heavyweight, trying to make this massive comeback on a pretty centrist platform. And on the other side, you've got Zohran Mamdani, a state assemblyman and Democratic Socialist, whose whole campaign was laser-focused on one single word: affordability. And leading up to that primary, honestly, if you looked at the polls, they were all telling the exact same story. Andrew Cuomo was the clear frontrunner. I mean, as the establishment favorite, his wins seemed like a sure thing. But then, the votes were counted, and the city was absolutely stunned. Mamdani didn't just squeak by, he totally blew past all the polls, beating Cuomo by a solid 5.2 percentage points. So just like that, Mamdani had pulled off this huge upset and snagged the Democratic nomination. But hold on, the story was nowhere near over. Cuomo refused to back down, and almost immediately he pivoted and launched an independent campaign for the general election. And this, of course, set the stage for a really high-stakes three-way fight for the city. You had a progressive Democrat, a centrist independent, and a tough-on-crime Republican, all battling for the future of New York. The choice for voters couldn't have been more different. Mamdani, he just kept hammering away on affordability and housing. Cuomo shifted his message to crime and antisemitism, and in a really surprising move, he actually turned down an endorsement from Donald Trump. And then you had the Republican Curtis Sliwa running a very traditional tough-on-crime campaign. The whole race really snapped into focus in September when the incumbent Eric Adams finally dropped his own long-shot independent bid. Once Adams was out, voters were left with a really stark choice between these three remaining candidates. So, how did this all shake out in the end? Let's take a look at the actual results, and maybe more importantly, the story behind the numbers that led to this truly historic win. On November 4th, the results were anything but close. Zohran Mamdani won with over 50% of the vote. And get this, he became the first mayoral candidate to break the 1 million vote barrier since all the way back in 1969. That is a massive mandate. So how did he do it? Well, the secret sauce really came down to a huge generational divide. A staggering 78% of voters under 30, the generation dealing with insane rent and unsteady jobs, they went all in for Mamdani. On the flip side, a majority of voters over 65 sided with Cuomo's more traditional message. It was a crystal clear sign that the city's youth had found their political voice. And in his victory speech, Mamdani just leaned right into the identity that his opponents had tried to use against him. It was this really defiant, really powerful message that basically announced a new political order in the city. Of course, the reaction from the other side was just as strong. In his concession speech, Curtis Sliwa didn't just admit he lost, he basically issued a warning. He was signaling that the new mayor was going to face intense opposition from day one. So, what does a Mamdani mayoralty even look like? Well, his victory speech and his inaugural address laid out a super bold vision, and it was met with both instant praise and some serious pushback. Yeah, he did not waste any time. His agenda was incredibly clear and audacious. Universal childcare, paid for by taxing the rich, an immediate freeze on rents for stabilized apartments, and making all city buses fast and free. These weren't just small changes. These were promises of a total system shift.
And this whole agenda was really rooted in one core idea. In his first address, he promised to embrace collectivism. It was a really clear signal that he planned to govern with a focus on the community and shared responsibility, not just individual success.
The reaction was immediate, and it was completely polarized. You had London's mayor cheering the win, but right back at home, major Jewish organizations were voicing deep concern over what they called his core beliefs. The business world was split too. Some leaders offered to cooperate, while others were already talking about packing up and leaving the city.
And this election sent ripples way beyond New York. I mean, as a sign of just how tense things were nationally, the governor of Texas actually joked about putting a 100% tariff on any New Yorkers trying to move there. It just shows you how closely the rest of the country was watching.
And that really brings us to the big final question, doesn't it? Is this the beginning of a bold new chapter for America's largest city? Maybe a model for a whole new way of running cities? Or is it a cautionary tale about what happens when you try to change things too radically, too fast? One thing's for sure, the entire nation is watching to see what happens next.